Why do the religious not understand that belief and faith are two entirely different things? Or rather, why do they refuse to understand that? This time, we catch up with Andy Bannister as he tries to tell a story, a probably entirely fictitious story, to appeal to a wholly religious audience. But it only takes a moment to step back and realize just how ridiculous it all is. So, let's go take a look. It's time we return to our, quote, Christian friend, Andy Bannister, to see what he's been up to, and as expected, he's still making a fool of himself, because he makes pretty much every bad mistake that a theist can stumble into, and he's apparently proud of it. Why are these people so utterly unable to examine their beliefs critically and see what everyone is telling them is wrong? Oh, right, because Andy hides in a religious echo chamber with his comments shut off. How could I forget? So please, Andy, tell us your tale. Excuse us if we laugh. I'm going to stop you right there, Andy. I don't know if I'd go that far, because just because something appears to me and says they're God, that doesn't mean that they're actually God. I'd have to be convinced by objective evidence that whatever this thing that claims to be God actually is God. If you can do that, then yes, absolutely, I'll believe that God is real. I've had it demonstrated to me. But I'm not going to worship it. That's an entirely different question. But I bet you don't understand that, do you?
Andy, if someone were to say, if God suddenly appeared to me, I would believe in him, how would you respond to that?
I'm always willing to believe if the object of said belief can be objectively demonstrated. I think most atheists are. The problem is, the religious have no evidence at all to present that will objectively demonstrate that the object of their faith is real. Atheists, by and large, are not impressed by faith. If you absolutely must have faith, then chances are you've already lost. As Matt Dillahunty says, faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have evidence. I don't have faith. I don't do faith. If that's what's required to believe in your imaginary friend, give up. You've got no chance with me.
Do you know, one of my favourite conversations I once had, Alan, was back when I was living in Canada. I just finished an event and a young man came up to me to speak to me afterwards and raised just this question. He introduced himself. He said, "Hi, I'm Steve. I'm an atheist." And I think I recall saying, "Why don't I just call you Steve? It's shorter." And he said, "Well, I'm an atheist, Andy." He said, "But I'm willing to believe in God this evening." And there was something about his demeanour that told me there was perhaps an elephant trap here. So I said, "Oh, that sounds very interesting. Go on." And then he raised exactly this one. He said, "Yes, all that would need to happen is for God to do a personal miracle for me right here, right now, this evening, and I would believe in God."
I wouldn't even do that unless it can be proven, again with evidence, that whatever happened was actually a miracle, not just something I didn't understand, and that it was actually done by a real, existent deity. But those things simply aren't on the table when you're talking about religion, are they? And I'm sorry, but they have to be. They must be. It's not an option. A Christian isn't going to suddenly have faith in Krishna without evidence. So they have no right to expect us to believe in God without the same thing. There are no double standards here. I wouldn't believe in anything without evidence. I don't care if you're talking about gods or aliens or monsters or honest politicians. No evidence, no belief. And I don't care how that makes you feel.
And he kind of stopped and smiled like the kind of cat that hasn't just got the cream but the entire dairy. And I thought about it for a moment and I looked at him and I said, "Okay, let me clarify. If you were to walk out of this building in half an hour's time out into the car park, and then suddenly, in letters of fire above the Rocky Mountains, because we were in Vancouver where this conversation was happening, above the mountains appeared the message, "Dear Steve, I love you, hugs and kisses Jesus, you would believe in God. Is that what you're saying?" And he went, "Yes." And again, he looked quite triumphant, so obviously assuming that I hadn't, rigged up special effects above the mountains for him.
I wouldn't. Theoretically, that can be replicated naturally. Some super advanced aliens might be able to do that, and they are not, by definition, gods. It's why I always tell the religious when they ask, God, if he's all-knowing and all-powerful, then he'd know what would convince me that he was real. And because I'm not convinced, he hasn't seen fit to do so. Either God doesn't want me to believe, or God doesn't exist. And hey, who am I to argue with the will of God?
So I said, okay, interesting. I said, has it ever occurred to you that God is not particularly interested in you believing in him?
Funny, since according to your own mythology, God is going to send me to roast for all eternity if I don't. That sure sounds like God is interested in getting his ass kissed. Otherwise, he wouldn't punish people who don't do it. Or don't you understand your own belief system, Andy?
I wish I could have taken a photo, actually, because it was sort of quite a startled face he pulled. He went, what? I said, oh, God's not merely interested in you believing in him. He said, I thought you were a vicar of some kind. I went, well, I suppose I am of some kind. He went, are you one of those liberal ones that we hear about in the news? I went, no, I'm one of those conservative ones that you also hear about in the news. He went, then what the heck are you talking about?
It's not like you know, because this is just another attempt to get around your own burden of proof. It's why all of these "what would make you believe" arguments completely fall apart. Even if I had a single example of what would convince me, it's not like Andy has any evidence to present to show that God is real. Theists are holding an empty bag. It doesn't matter what you say, they can't provide it. It's just a diversion to get away from the undeniable fact that they've got nothing.
I said, well, here's the thing. I said, it says in the Bible, actually, that even the devil believes in God and trembles.
I honestly don't care what it says in your silly book of mythology, Andy. I care what is demonstrably real. And until you can prove, with evidence, that the things in your silly book actually happened, I don't care. You have to start somewhere, and you're really not starting anywhere. You're starting with the assumption that blind faith is the only path to your deity, and we're telling you that we reject that path. If that's all you've got, we're not interested. You have failed. You will continue to fail. You have absolutely nothing to succeed with. Now, that may not bother you, and I guess I'm fine with that, but I will continue to point out every time you bring up this nonsense that what you're talking about is irrational and idiotic. I can't stop you from asking for it, but that doesn't make it an intellectual pursuit just because you wish it was one. You have to do a lot better than this, Andy. That, or I guess you can just keep making a fool of yourself.
So mere belief is not what matters. I said, Steve, God is not interested in beating you at some game of intellectual chess, giving you some ridiculous piece of evidence, and then you're forced to go, okay, God exists, and then you walk away and God has become one more fact you believe in.
And why would you do that if there's no reason to think that this God of yours is real? How is that any better than saying that invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies want your total submission and blind faith and all of your money on a silver platter? Why would you do that? Why would you take that claim seriously when there are no gods or no pixies in evidence? Because that's the real question here. Why would you, a supposedly, I guess, rational human being, fall for such an obvious scam? Are you really that stupid?
I said, God is just not interested in you merely believing in him. And then it was great because his follow-up question was, well, what is God interested in? And I said, I'm glad you asked that. I said, God actually wants not just your belief, but your complete, total submission and surrender. God basically wants you to bow the knee, wave as it were the white flag, surrender, take your hands off your life and say, God, my entire life is yours, I give it all to you.
And if you did that, you'd starve in the street and die. Because it's funny that all of these people like Andy, the people who say you just have to give it all over to God, they still get up in the morning and go to work. They still keep their hands on the wheel and they look both ways before crossing the street. Because they really don't take that seriously. It's all lip service. They don't believe any of that for a second. They make those claims and then rationalize away why they shouldn't actually act on their faith. God doesn't actually provide, not in any objectively demonstrable way. It's all just a sham.
And that's what God's after. And then he looked at me and he said, well, what right has God got to demand that? Which I thought was a great question. I said, well, two thoughts, really. I said, the first thought is that, of course, it's God's game and God's rules. God's the creator of the universe. That's the way he's designed it. He gets the right to design it the way he wants.
So, what you're saying, Andy, is God is not ethical. If you read the Old Testament, that's exactly what it shows. God is a douchebag. Now, granted, at the time the Old Testament was written, that's what most people around the world thought about their gods. Look at the ancient mythology sometime, Andy. Gods were immoral monsters. By the time the New Testament rolled around, people didn't really want to deal with that anymore, so they recast God as a loving deity that wants a personal relationship with everyone, but they just can't do away with the old stuff no matter how hard they try. So they just make up excuses for why they get to selectively pick and choose which parts they like and which parts they're going to ignore. But they don't understand that the rest of us see exactly what they're doing. We're not impressed with their theological sleight of hand. Their absurd crap is still absurd crap, no matter what mental gymnastics they go through to convince themselves that it's reasonable. It isn't, and no amount of brainwashing will ever make it so.
But I said more seriously, I said God gets the right to ask everything from you because he's already taken the first move. And he's given you everything. The Bible says in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, that while we were still sinners, while we were still rebels, while we were still messing around with silly intellectual games, God demonstrates his love in that Christ died for us.
Prove it. Because once again, this is just faith with no evidence whatsoever. You are taking these absurd claims ripped straight out of your ass, and we don't buy it. You haven't shown that anything you're saying is true. Faith doesn't create fact. We expect fact, and you simply have none. It's one thing for us to believe something based on evidence. I think most atheists would believe that a God was real if it could be objectively demonstrated that one was. But faith, that's not something we're willing to do. Faith and facts are not the same thing. Belief based on evidence and blind obedience, they're not the same thing. You desperately want us to get to blind faith, but you have to follow all the other steps first, and you're not even making a good faith effort.
So God's given you everything. He's given you the life of his son, Jesus, in order to win for you forgiveness and reconciliation and peace. That's what's on offer on the table.
Yeah, but that might be the dumbest thing you can possibly say, Andy. The only reason we need forgiveness and reconciliation is because your God is an asshole. Your God is a self-centered, egotistical prick that knowingly made up arbitrary rules that he knew full well nobody could follow. In fact, he specifically made man so that he'd fail. Then he holds us accountable for groveling at his feet to correct mistakes that God himself made. And you worship this jack-off. What the hell is your problem, Andy?
So God's not asking you to do anything he hasn't already done. But of course that brings us to Jesus, which is also important here. Because even if God did that amazing miracle and wrote something across the Rocky Mountains in fire, it'd be quite impressive now. But a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, you've forgotten it. It's over, it's in the distant past.
What? Are you saying God just can't keep doing it? God just can't keep it there forever? Isn't he God? You seem to be placing an awful lot of limitations on this imaginary friend of yours. For somebody supposedly all-powerful and all-knowing, he doesn't seem to be good at much. You insist that he created this absurd Rube Goldberg system for forgiveness when he could, just forgive everyone for all eternity and stop being a dick. But no, you've got this imaginary father figure in the sky who has every childish human foible you can imagine, and this is the thing you choose to bow down to. And then you pretend that there's something wrong with us.
And there's no evidence, unless, you've got your iPhone camera out very, very quickly, but it's a miraculous message. Maybe it doesn't appear in photographs. More of a miracle. How do you know that what you saw actually happened?
How do you know that the things that you believe are actually true? That's a better question, because at least if there were some huge fiery letters appearing in the sky, we could properly document that it was real. You've got nothing, Andy. Absolutely nothing. Yet you spend all of your time running around telling people that you have to have faith. Why? Why would we have faith in something that we have absolutely no verifiable means of proving is true? We want proof, and you have none. That's why you're so terrified of anyone talking to you. It's why your comments and your ratings are disabled, because you know we've got you dead to rights, and you can't dare let any of us talk to your idiotic followers and tell them the truth.
And the amazing thing about the resurrection is the overwhelming evidence for who Jesus was, what he did, and the historical evidence for the resurrection.
And where is that evidence exactly? We have absolutely no records of Jesus whatsoever. We have no eyewitness accounts of Jesus, period. And before you say that, hey, there's no records of most people back then, we're not the ones saying that you have to believe in Joe Blow of Jerusalem to save your eternal soul. That's you. We have no reason at all to take you seriously. If you can't provide evidence, screw you, Andy. You had one job, and you failed.
Reminds me, whenever I have any doubts about what I believe and I want to be reassured, I just go back and remind myself that incredible event of what God did for me in the person of Jesus was so well attested in terms of evidence, fantastic foundation on which I'm willing to step forward and say to God, okay, you win. Everything I have is yours.
Except absolutely none of that is true. Not one word. You can't present any of that supposed evidence for independent critical evaluation. Just because it says so in a book that you like, that doesn't mean that it's true. It says all kinds of things in the Vedas or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It makes claims in the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Kesh Temple Hymn. But you don't believe any of those things, nor should you, because none of it can be independently verified. But the same thing goes for the Bible. I don't care what you like. I care what you can prove, and we all know you can't prove a damn thing. It's why you, like so many other apologists, spend all of your time talking about atheists, but never to atheists. I don't believe this story of yours ever took place. It's just another lie designed to make your religious audience feel better about the ridiculous things that they believe. The things that you make a buck off of. Just follow the money, people. It's really not that hard to understand.
Bum